Hello. Well, I'm sure those of you of a more politically correct persuasion will be really pleased to know that Sir Richard Arkwright is getting the woke treatment from English Heritage. This is a blue plaque. If you haven't been to Britain, you wouldn't really know that those blue plaques are put up on the walls of buildings that are associated with famous or important people, and if they lived there or were born there or died there or something. And they have apparently the English Heritage. I used to be a member of English Heritage, and I paid my annual dues, and I'm glad I don't anymore. They've given, apparently English Heritage have an online blue plaque system, and they put this note next to it. The blue plaque includes claims that the father of the factory system benefited from a system that exploited enslaved workers. Now, looking at that picture, I mean, just look at the size of that guy. You're not supposed to offend people for the way they look, but, well, he's enormous. And he's got this boil on the side of his face by the looks of things. So the general impression is he looks like, what was he called? Kenneth Macmillan, the actor who played Baron Harkonnen in the David Lynch version of Dune, doesn't he? I half expect him to go floating about the picture there. Well, anyway, that's entirely imposing my modern view on this fellow, which is just about as ridiculous as them imposing this view on Arkwright, that he benefited from basically the enslaved workers. For sure they were exploited. This was the beginning of the factory system, and this is what happened anyway. Everybody was exploited. It was a different sort of society. And imposing these ideas on Richard Arkwright it's complete nonsense. Yeah, things were hard and times were hard, and people were tougher to each other probably in the cities, in the town. But that's what happened. You see, there were villages, and people tended to look after each other in villages, and then they moved to the towns, and nobody knew anybody else, and the social structure fell apart. It took generations before artificial means of looking after people had established themselves. This is rubbish. Anyway, let's get on with this thing about Arkwright. The father of the factory system contributed to the slave... Oh, hang on a minute. We're all doing that now. You do realise that, don't you? The computer I'm using, this hard drive, what else? The phone, everything. Most of it's been made in China, including this microphone I'm wearing now. Nearly everything has been made in China. And in buying and using these items, I am contributing to a sort of slave trade. I don't know why people in English Heritage aren't paying attention to that, rather than going at their historical situations where people really weren't aware in the same way. We know now. We are worse than people like Arkwright. God, he's fat. What did he do with his workers? Eat them? Anyway, but look, while I was researching the Arkwright thing, I came across the fact that Teddy Roosevelt's statue had been moved from... he was called Teddy Roosevelt, wasn't it? From the American Museum of Natural History. So it's the same sort of thing. And this is the headline in Smithsonian, which is absolutely appalling. It says, "The racist statue of Theodore Roosevelt will no longer loom over the American Museum of Natural History." I don't think that statue's racist. It does reflect an idea at the time that the white man was going to lead the other types of men into a brave new world. But it wasn't like he was excluding them from it. And the statues of these various racial types are certainly dignified and they are in no way caricatures, although they contain elements from different tribes. So the Indian, apparently, or as some people would have it, the Native American, although so far as I know, all the Americans I know are natives of that place, he's wearing different kit from different tribes. And the African, too, appears to be dressed, well, basically in a Greek god-type way. So altogether, the artist was not regarding these people as inferior, but backward in some way, technologically backward. And Theodore Roosevelt is leading them into the new world of technological development. And at the time that Roosevelt was riding his horse, sub-Saharan Africa was mostly undeveloped and underdeveloped, and the Indians weren't doing so well either. So that was the idea. Now, you could say there are reasons for this. I'm not going into that. I'm just talking about the situation as it was. And I don't see anything racist about that statue. It reflects what was going on at the time of Roosevelt. And here's the statue being hauled away. So let it never be said that the British are backward in following the Americans forward. Let's go on. The legacy of Sir Richard Arkwright, the British inventor credited with pioneering factory production in the 18th century, has been reassessed due to his profiting from the cotton trade during the Industrial Revolution. And as I say, I profit from the electronics trade, and I know more about it than most of the people knew around Arkwright knew about it. English heritage has included claims that the mill owner benefited from a system which exploited enslaved workers from Africa. Well, it exploited enslaved workers in Britain as well, although they weren't quite called slaves. In updated online information for his blue plaque. The update, made as part of a review of blue plaques launched in the wake of Black Lives Matter protests, oh yeah, wouldn't it be that, has drawn criticism from historians concerned that history is being viewed only through the lens of the slave trade, and that ordinary workers could also be found guilty by association with a cotton industry that was supported by slavery. The information has been added, well, it says so. In the 1770s, Sir Richard developed a carding machine which sped up the process prior to spinning, along with spinning frames speeding up the process of turning cotton fibre into workable yarn. You know, children were employed in those sorts of factories to creep underneath the machines to clear bits of yarn that had fallen to the floor, or dirt or whatever. Sometimes their clothes or hair got caught in the machine, and they had great there's, you know, one case I read of where a girl, she got scalped. I don't know whether she survived. He used these machines in a string of mills, including a major complex in Cromford, Derbyshire, where his creation of a disciplined working day of 13-hour shifts involving mechanised manufacturing led him to being nicknamed the father of the factory system. New information stated Arkwright's wealth from the cotton industry was inextricably linked to the transatlantic slave trade, which reached its peak in the 18th century. The system exploited enslaved workers from Africa to work under horrifying conditions in the cotton plantations in the Americas. You know what? It probably wasn't it was horrifying, but every bit as horrifying were the conditions suffered by the people in the factories as well. Here in these islands, it is inevitable that any mill working in Britain at this time would have sourced the majority of their cotton from the slave plantations. As such, mill owners such as Arkwright both contributed to and benefited from the slave trade. However, the factory system itself was criticised at the time, especially for making use of child labour, which made up a large proportion of Sir Richard's workforce. You see, there's this victim thing where the only important people in this equation of oppression are the black slaves sold by Africans to white people to be shipped over to the States and to Jamaica and places like that to work in sugar plantations and cotton plantations. And that was awful. But what was going on here among the working classes was just as awful. A whole lot of social disruption as people couldn't do their weaving at home anymore because they just didn't have the output of these machines and had to go to towns where they lived in hovels, incredibly poor conditions, and stuck together in noisome tenements and with families breaking apart, and you know, all that stuff about you see in Jane Austen. That was among a group of people in the countryside. If you went into the towns, you would see a completely different sort of life. And if you care to read the privations suffered, and this was made even worse by the fact that at the time there was a window tax, so most of these tenements were virtually windowless as well. In fact, it was these conditions that forced the repeal of the window tax, but it took a while. Concerns have been raised that English Heritage's update on Sir Richard, which ties him to the slave trade, could also attach to guilt to factory workers. Pardon? Could also attach to guilt to factory workers. Well, I think we understand what they say. Could also attach guilt to factory workers who indirectly benefited from the cotton trade by working in his mills. Here's a romanticised picture of a cotton factory. They didn't look like that. There were dozens of these people. And as I said, kids climbing under the machines to clear out fluff and stuff that would get in the way and start fires, which did happen. Professor Robert Toombs, a historian at the University of Cambridge, said, Richard Arkwright, a working class man who invented a machine for spinning cotton, is apparently being blamed for slavery because most cotton was grown by slaves. So presumably workers in cotton mills, their dependents and all their customers are also responsible. By this logic, everybody was to blame. And yeah, so they were. But that's the way the world was at the time. They weren't to blame. That is the way the world was, which is perhaps the best conclusion, as slavery and other forms of coerced labour were part of the world economy for millennia and created much of what we now consider world heritage. Professor Neil Bigger, a theology expert at the University of Oxford, has criticised the viewing of Sir Richard's legacy purely through the lens of slavery, calling it a politically biased, monomaniacal focus. Oh, beautifully put. Dr. Zarir Massani, a historian on British colonialism, said, reducing all history to that of slavery and then tracing links to it, however tenuous, of most people of influence, especially in the 18th century, has become a popular pastime with our new arbiters of taste. since Black Lives Matter. He added that this analysis misses the ills of factory labour far closer to home. And they say they've contacted English Heritage for comment, but obviously haven't had any yet. Now, this is the Roosevelt statue, and I'll just read you a couple of things about this. This guy, David Hurst Thomas, a curator of anthropology, American Museum of Natural History. Roosevelt's up on the horse and he's on some kind of hunting expedition like he often did, and he has two gun bearers. One is African and one is Native American. The artist saw this as Roosevelt leading two continents into the 20th century. Yeah. And then you get this person here, and even she can't be wholehearted about it. Look, you have this very robust white male. They're all three of them are robust. That's the point. She is seeing things through a lens, and you can see how she's warping that lens. You have this very robust white male, Theodore Roosevelt, on his horse, who is as muscular as Roosevelt is. And then trailing behind are the African and Native. They're not trailing behind. They are determinedly walking with him, and they are every bit as muscular as he is. And they're not smaller either. They're just not on horses. They're in a very subservient role. They don't look subservient. They are definitely following him. And they may be carrying his guns. I don't know. I can't see that clearly. But they don't look subservient. They are with their own purpose. And then so she sees these people as subservient. And that's what's wrong with the philosophical leaders of the African American experience now, because you can see anything anyway. What was it Hamlet said? There is neither good nor bad, but thinking makes it so. She is reinterpreting these figures according to her own insecurities. Portrayed them in a but she says the sculptor portrayed them in a very dignified way, and so he did. And why can't she just say that? They're dignified. They are not technological like Roosevelt is, but they're dignified, and they are willingly walking with him. There are no chains, they're not being pulled, there are no guards around them. They are following him because he is technologically superior. He has a more technologically forward idea, and they have decided to go with it. Why can't she look at it like that? No, because she is insecure in her own mind, and so she's projecting all this stuff onto these statues, or as somebody would have it, sculptures. Portrayed them in a very dignified way, but their position of subservience remains. No, I don't. Each one of them could walk off. They could just go if they wanted to. But they're following him. That's not subservience, that's seeing sense according to the way that statue was portraying everything. And so we have this dreadful idea of taking away from the achievements of everyone. Roosevelt's achievements: he was a conservationist, he started the American national parks, he really did want to further the interests of people he regarded as backward in social development. And Arkwright. Now, Arkwright did a lot of... Arkwright enabled the poor to be clothed by making cheap cottons available. He also exploited the poor in the making thereof, but that's because that's the way things were in those days. And starting to talk about the slaves and racial issues ignores a whole world of setup. And as I say, I'm very glad I don't contribute to English Heritage anymore. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the Graniopteryx design or Grambo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.graniopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share.